let's go ahead and start. We're down to the final 2 full weeks and the last 2 chapters. And this one's got some new stuff in it. The last chapter is really not got any new things in it. It just combines all of the things you've been doing through the book together into a single network on it. So it's got a couple of new terms in it, but it pretty much is just a summarization of what you've done on the machines, okay? Not the theory, but the rest of it. So we're going to go over 16, probably make it through it today, I'm not sure. And if we do, then Wednesday, we'll go through the chapter 17, and then next week and the last Monday, because you do have class on Monday, maybe the 3rd or something like that, okay? That we'll use those days for lab days and for y'all to do your final cabling. And if you haven't done the midterm one, that's got to get finished first before you can do the final one. So we follow on that. I'm not sure if y'all have finished it or not, the ones that are in here, okay? It's recorded in the grade book, but I'm not looking at that right now. So if you haven't, you got to finish. And then the final lab is doing the same thing again with no assistance. Everybody follow that? So, and if you run into something in the process of doing it that you're totally lost in your point, you can ask me. If you ask me something, if I'll take off for it if I answer it. And then, depending on if you want to really ask me or not, I'll answer it or not for you. Okay? So you follow that part? Because there occasionally students come up with things that we hadn't had come up with otherwise. All right? And so just allowing for that. The other part y'all can work on during that time, those 3 days, is if you've got labs outstanding, work on those. And I know some people who in the room, in the class, don't have access to packet tracer from at home because it won't run on Chromebook for them. And that's the only thing they had. Although packet tracer runs on Linux, Mac, although they're dropping the Mac if I remember right, and PC. But they don't have Chromebook included. The other one is on the labs. Remember, if there are questions in the lab, you need to submit an answer sheet with the answers to the questions, along with the PKA file. Everybody got that? So, if you got, for instance, what's due today, if you had turned it in and just turned in the PKA file, but you had not turned in the Word document with the answers to the questions, you've still got through today to get that into, because I'm not grading until the due date. Although sometimes if people have turned in and it's completely correct, I do sometimes get a little bit ahead, which I may this afternoon actually. Some of my classes go ahead and grade stuff that's due today. But they've done everything right. But if it's not, I'm not grading it until after the due date. So I'm letting y'all, and all of the classes, if they make a mistake on it and they realize it before the due date, that they can resubmit it, get the full credit for it. So be aware of that. And then your final exam will become available on May 1st. which is Saturday, a week from this coming Saturday. And then it's due on May the 4th. We follow them up. So and it's from the same test bank, the same type questions that you've had on your test, from the whole book, so a lot of the questions should look familiar to you, that you probably have already seen. Okay? And it's twice as long as the other exams. Okay, so that's what it's supposed to be. And they give you twice as much time. So where I've been giving you 45 minutes on it, you'll get an hour and a half time on that. Questions on all of that? And try, if you've got stuff late turning in, try to be getting that stuff on into me. Don't hold out and turn it in that Sunday and Monday in 2 weeks. Because it is busy from that point on for me. Everything will be finally, I will not accept assignments after that Monday or test, okay? And then the final, I'll get accepted through that Tuesday, which is actually final exam day, because that Monday's the last day of classes for the spring semester here. And then that Tuesday is final exam. Tuesday, Wednesday actually, but your final will be on one of the 2 days. So I've got all my classes finals due on Tuesday, got to make them available from Saturday so that those people that do tests on the weekends have the weekend to do it on. Okay? So all of that, there's going to be a number of things coming to me that Monday, night, and then Tuesday, obviously, I got final labs in all of my other classes, except for the 2 sections of this class. I'll have to get graded. Okay. And those will be on that Tuesday. And then Thursday evening, I have to go to Rome for graduation. So that means I'm supposed to have the afternoon off. By the time I drive down to Rome for graduation at 7, I think it is, or something. And so drive through graduation and then drive back up to Lafayette from it. That's going to take me 4 hours or so out of that. And then grades maybe due that Friday morning. Sometimes they have them due on that Friday morning. Sometimes they're due on Monday morning. But that next week is the only week the school has no classes before summer semester starts a week later. So I would like to take some time off that week, and I've also got get my classes set up for summer. So even if grades are due Monday morning, I want to get them in by Friday morning, but you can see what all I got to get done by the time I turn grades in. I got to get all of that grading done and make sure everything's out there correctly. In y'all's case, in the 3 Cisco classes I'm teaching, they're using Cisco materials. I've got to get all the grades transferred back and forth between 2 systems, which I did have all of that done as of about 2 weeks ago. And I didn't work on it last week on doing grade transfers, but mostly prior to that point, everything should be transferred across. Okay, so your test grade should be appearing in both places. Your assignment should be in both places. Remember, assignment grades automatically appear in Blackboard. Test grades automatically appear at Medicare. Apparently, they had problems at Medicare Saturday. They had maintenance scheduled for Friday night from like 10 o'clock till 2 a.m. Saturday morning. And Medicare was down until somewhere about 6 o'clock Saturday evening. It is possible that you will still end up getting part of a page along with a 404 error on it, because I've had that pop up on my machine some after that, but you're getting the broad part around the page on it with the login spot on it. And if you go ahead and click login, even though it's saying 404 big in the middle of the page, it gives you the logon screen and you get into Medicare. So they're following that. But apparently they ran into a problem of whatever they were doing on their maintenance. And that happens when you do upgrades, maintenance, etc. And I assume, and they said maintenance on it, and I'm sure they were doing some upgrades, etc. on it, because there's some things they have been saying they were going to add out there for us. And I assume that some of that stuff got added at that point. So for some reason, they ran into a problem on it, and so most of Saturday, it was down. But yesterday afternoon, I know it was working. I haven't been into Netiquette this morning, and I'm assuming it's working again, but it wanted to change the address when you go to type it in each time, or just click onto it if you had it showing on Google or whatever across there. During the outage, it wanted to change that to where it was netiquette.com/outage, and then they killed that page when they finally got it back up and working. But it was demanding to still trying to go there, and that's where the 404 error was coming from. And that was appearing in a frame inside of the Netiquette page, which meant that we had the header and the footer correct, but a 404 in the middle of it. But the login, I then discovered when that was happening, I went ahead and clicked on the login, and I was in the classes. So that was working. All right, chapter 16 is looking at network security and some basics on security, and especially around the network. Okay, so y'all took security last semester, right? Because wasn't that what Mr. Spurlock taught y'all? Was the 1601 security. So most of what's in this chapter should be familiar to you already from that course, okay? Although that was not necessarily looking from network viewpoint, but more individual machines, but it's the same type of things. So they talk about first here about types of threats that are out there in the world, and that if somebody gains access, that what type of threat could occur at that point. And they talk about threat actors, is Cisco's terminology on it, okay? And they use threat actors to cover everything, including ones that by definition actually are not people that are trying to break in your system. So what we call white hat hackers, otherwise, they have put into the threat actor category. So everybody follow that? Well, as a white hat hacker, they put as a threat actor because they're doing it for good reasons, and they're hired to do it quite often. They're specifically supposed to be doing it to find vulnerabilities, but they are a threat to the system, okay? Even though they are white hat, and they're finding the things so we can block them and keep the bad guys out. So they're the good guys, but because of what they're doing bad things as part of their job of good. So the definition Cisco uses now is just threat actor to cover black hat, gray hat, white hat, your scammers, your phishers, whatever, okay? Does everybody follow on that one? So they made it into one single term of anybody that is a threat in any way to your network. And made it a little bit more broad on that one. Because that, the white hat part is where there's a good bit of disagreement with them all, including them into there. But their problem is they're going, we can't always tell exactly if they're totally white. And I'm going, you can. If they're a white hat, they're totally white. If they're a gray hat, then they're doing good things, but not necessarily always doing it through the good system on it, okay? But usually gray hat could be somebody that breaks into your system, not breaking into it, trying to damage it, but they then report to you things they find bad about it, but they were not being authorized to go do that. With the white hat one, when they break into your system, you've actually authorized them to break into your system. Although sometimes there's been that not everybody gets the message, and those people get in trouble too. Because it's not just when they hack into your systems, not just hacking into the computer equipment, but also can they get in and get to the computer equipment and stuff. And I have not seen a resolution of a case from a year or two ago out in Iowa, I think it was, that the security firm was hired to test the state of Iowa's networks and computer systems, and told to make sure everything was secure about all of that stuff. And they told them they were going to not just be going in through the network, but they were also going to see about did they physically get into the equipment and all of that. And they got, a couple of them got arrested and charged on breaking into a courthouse, into entering without permission into it in a section and getting to the computer equipment. Got arrested and charged with breaking and entering, and there was a big national story on it. I have not seen a resolution on that. The sheriff would not drop the charges, even though it had been told to him repetitively these people were supposed to be doing what they were doing. And so he had a felon mark on these people and was going to mess up their career in security from it. And they were doing what they were hired to do and what their company was hired to do. And nobody seemed to be stepping forward and taking care of the matter. And I don't know if it ended up going to court with them or what. And if it's been resolved at this point or not, but that is got to be a big issue there on it. Because you can't have a felon record on you and be a computer security person. Not very easily. But you're going to get marked out of a lot of jobs right off the bat applying on that. And then for others, you're going to have to try to, maybe you'll get passed and get to an interview, but you're going to have to explain what happened and hope they buy the story. Which they will in some cases, okay? So it's not, a felon's not an automatic rejection on it, but it is awful close to that. So types of threats are, your information could be stolen, so it's an information threat. You could have data loss. And that, as opposed to information theft, because the information theft is they get a copy of your information. Okay, so now they got all your information. Data loss is where your data's gone. Ransomware attacks would be a real good example of data loss. Okay, although a lot of ransomware attacks now actually play both parts, information theft and data loss. And then data manipulations on there too. They could go in and be changing your information. And for instance, this being a college, that a college has the issue of students sometimes breaking into systems and changing their grades. Okay? The odd part is they always want to change F's to A's, not never changing A's to F's. I don't understand that one. Identity theft is another one, where they get your information for your identity, and then with that one, they can go out and steal individuals' information. And then the last one is disruption of services. And that's where we've talked about the denial of service attacks, and that's actually mentioned here in this chapter also, where the object is you're not trying to get their information or anything, you're just trying to stop the organization from being able to work for a time period. Okay, and to disrupt them. And if it's a business or whatever, if you disrupt their stuff for a certain time period, you can bankrupt them on the fact that they couldn't get orders or whatever. So, on those. And like a ransomware attack nowadays, in a lot of cases, is they actually go in first and copy your information, so they did them. data loss on it. They did an information theft on it, I mean, and then they proceed to encrypt all your data. So they get a copy of it first and then encrypt it all, and then tell you that you can pay up and that they'll give you the key back where you can get your data back, but they've got your data and they'll start selling it on the dark web. Or tell you you got to pay up a certain amount and that they won't sell it on the dark web. But they've got your data, and even if you pay them to not sell the data, you don't know if they're going to sell the data or not, if they're going to actually get rid of it at that point or not really. Likewise, if you pay them to get the encryption key, you don't know if you'll actually get an encryption key. I mean, you don't know if you'll actually get one from them or if it will even work. Okay? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So then they talk about the vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities are where's the weaknesses that somebody could attack us at. Okay? Where's the spots that they can get in. Okay? If we walk out in the parking lot and check cars, that the cars that have not locked their doors, that unlocked door on their cars is a vulnerability. Did everybody follow that? Actually, the windows around the car are a vulnerability too. Obviously, we could walk around the parking lot with a big hammer or a rock and throw through the window on the side of a car and get in the car also. So there's a vulnerability. Okay, follow that? The threat is what can be stolen out of that car, okay, or the car being stolen. So they mentioned that there's vulnerabilities with TCP/IP, and as we mentioned on TCP/IP, it's been around since like 1980, okay, actually since the early 70s, actually some of the protocols on it trace back to 69. So it has been there a long time, but there's a number of protocols that do have weaknesses and that they're continuously trying to do better on. So they mentioned there about some different ones on that, on the HTTP, FTP, ICMP are all chronically insecure. So those are ones very much easily misused. But that's pretty much the HTTP, you can't make it very well secure just using HTTP versus HTTPS. Okay? Operating system weaknesses are out there, and that is where Microsoft for Windows, at least once a month, they try to do it just once a month now, that on one of the Tuesdays, and I don't know which Tuesday it is, I think it's the second Tuesday if I remember right, that they've designated as Patch Tuesday, and that they release updates that are improvements to Windows, but also they release security updates at that point. And so they're continuously all finding things in all of the operating systems. And if it is a major issue when they discover between those, the second Tuesdays, and there's a reason for doing second Tuesday is because remember, the time all the way around the world is off by 24 hours. So if we release it at 9 o'clock this morning here, part of the world's going to get it yesterday, and part of the world will actually get it tomorrow. Okay? So they've designated it as Patch Tuesday, where you should get it somewhere around on that second Tuesday. And that's why they're using second Tuesday, not first Tuesday, so that it is during the month, that you get it during that month. Because the first Tuesday, people that got it, where at that point it was before Tuesday started, they actually got it the previous month. They'll follow on that. So that's why they've gone with the second Tuesday on it. And that's actually out there designated as Patch Tuesday for Microsoft. And that's when it used to be, a long way back, they actually released patches all the time whenever they found things and got it figured out. And it got to be chronic where we were going crazy with, there would probably be several patches released a week. And people are going, there's no way we can keep up with this as far as your IT administration people or even people trying to keep their machines at home updated. And even with Windows 10, which automatically updates itself, the issue doing that approach is that you slow down the machine all the time trying to do updates, going down the updates and installing. So now it's supposed to occur once a month unless it's something they define as really a top level security issue, and then they will put it out sooner. And that's not very often. And then they mentioned about network equipment weaknesses. They've got the same issues as your computers, etc., that you got to get updates to them. So all of them have different type things that get into there on it and that need to be constantly updated. Unsecured user accounts, that definitely occurs on a lot of equipment. And that's where we kept telling you in here that you've been told as you've done your labs to either use, I think, Cisco class or CCNA V7, I think is what they had for you using as passwords on the equipment. Is that right? It used to be just the CCNA, no, it used to be just Cisco and class was the two passwords they used, and now they started using CCNA V7 if you're doing newest things with the V7 version of the software. But big emphasis is at you is realize when you go out to use real equipment that you're setting it up in a production environment. Now, if you're setting it up in a test environment, those work, password works for the password, etc. But if you're putting in production environment, they need to be secure passwords on every one of those, okay? So that people, because I can give you odds that we could walk into plenty of Cisco environments of places using Cisco equipment, and we could walk up and get onto their equipment using password, Cisco, class, okay, and maybe CCNA V6, V7, okay? But with those top three, we can get into a huge amount, but just password will get you into 70% is what studies show of people's accounts. They got password as their password. That's 70% of the time is what I've kept seeing studies on. I really doubt that it being quite that big, but that's what I hear. Okay. So user accounts need security. The other part is on that one is that also when somebody leaves your organization, you should disable their account. Don't necessarily want to delete their account, okay, but you want to disable. Because in Windows, you really want to just go in and disable their account. And like if it was set up for their job of what they did, if you disable it, then when the person that's going to replace them gets hired in and starts in, you don't have to rebuild that whole account, figure out what all the settings are you got to do on Gold. You can set it back to what exactly what the previous person was doing just by changing name and password on the account and enabling it. The other part is if you did have a security issue, if you delete it, you don't have any trail there. If it was somebody that you had a security issue with, you don't have any trail there to be able to show back on it. So you got a legal issue on that one, okay, if you were going to try to take them to court or anything. The other one is, and this I just specifically heard yesterday from a person, that they were let go on their job last October, November, and they were actually a security administrator for a big firm, and that they discovered recently they can still use the login they had into that company's network. Nobody has shut it down. And that's a definite security issue there with that organization. And I've heard of plenty of others similar, and I have actually noticed sometimes where something I had been in, and actually I've been into some machines where I was setting up some web pages for an ISP and got in there and discovered that when they had given me a username and password for setting up whatever organization's web page, and I got in there and accidentally clicked up a level and discovered that I was on administrator level and had full administrator rights and could go into every web page that was hosted on their site. Which I wrote the company and told them right off, because it was a smaller company, similar to Ringgold Telephone, but smaller than Ringgold Telephone. It was a rural area of Georgia. And told them, you need to change your security settings on this. That I don't know if it's just me, that you happen to have set my security settings too loose, or if you've set everybody that administers websites too loose, which they fixed right after that and told me they had. And that I've heard of other similar type situations. That I was sitting there, I wasn't intending to even look around in their stuff, and accidentally said to go up, and I was going up and down levels as I was copying my pages onto their server, and accidentally went to go up one level too high, hit my CD dot, one time too many, and it should have just stopped right there and not done anything. And I discovered I was sitting on the wrong level. So, and I real quick let them know. And I went in and looked because I was going, no, I can't be where I am. And I've got to be just seeing this stuff. And I went into one of the pages, and it was one that I knew the people that had it. So I clicked into that one and went no, and stuck something there just to see if I could. Not that it was going to hurt anything of what I stuck right there, but just to see could I add a file, and yep, it was there. And I'm going, no, I'm not supposed to be able to do this. Somebody could do all kinds of stuff. So be careful on that. System accounts with easily guessed passwords. When you create a user account, you are going to end up probably having to give easily generated passwords off of it that you create for them. But you can set on there the requirement that the first time they go in, they have to change their password. So you'll find if y'all go to work someplace that they give you a password there. They're going to give you a real simple password. And I think the school did too for you, because didn't they give you as a password like your email address was your birth date was your password, and then you were supposed to change it, okay? Which I think most people, and I think they may have it set correctly for email and all of that, where you have to change it. But out there on my GNTC, for registering, it does not make you change your PIN number. To get into my GNTC, you have to use that other one, which I'm pretty sure you have to change. I think they make you change that when you first go in. Okay? But once you get in there where you have to put a PIN number in to be able to register, it does not make that be changed. And when I register students, I have to have that number to be able to register them. And it's their birthday. So I'm writing students down, I need your PIN, and unless you changed it, it's your birthday. And almost everybody, it's their birthday. And so that's not very secure on that. But it's just for adding courses out there. So, and you're already having to get in securely, so that's probably okay. Misconfigured internet services. It says when JavaScript's turned on in a web browser, well, you got to have JavaScript turned on in a web browser. I don't know where these people come from different places that tell you about turn off JavaScript in your web browsers. because you then block out a bunch of web pages that you can't get them to work correctly if you do that, because they use JavaScript to get their things on the pages. So then they mentioned about other things that could be set up wrong on the server also. So be aware of that. And then I already made the comment to you about unsecured default settings and products. Well, that's what we just said about there on banner, okay? And then you've got plenty of other things that you'll see on it where you don't have to do anything particular. Misconfigured network equipment, and we've talked about that really prior to that. Make sure that you got everything set up correctly, not just the passwords, but everything else, so that it's not insecure. Policy vulnerabilities. One, lack of a written security policy. No policy that says how things are to be done. The other part on that one is you need to let people know what the security policy is. There's plenty of places that have security policy, but they didn't bother to tell anybody about what the security policy is. As a matter of fact, we look here at school, there is a security policy on the computers, but they just give you a brief little summary thing from the state when you log on to the system. That, as far as I know, I don't know where in the world is the policy where we can access it, where y'all can know what's the actual policy of the school, of how it's secured, and that I can know as a faculty. So that's faculty or student, okay? I'm sure the IT people know where it is and know what it is, because it's not going to be some little short thing that just says you shouldn't do what you're not allowed to do on this network, which is what you do check off every time you log on to the network. Okay, but there's a lot more to it. Politics can be a security vulnerability of different people saying they need to do into different things about what they should be allowed to do, etc., and that messes up security policies about why is one person allowed in and why are they not allowed in to do all the different things they're allowed to do. I wouldn't doubt if there's not some people in the school that are aware that on my office machine, I can do just about anything I want to do on there, which they allow me to do. But most of the faculty members, they don't allow to set up programs, etc., on their machine because they don't know computers and different things or how to install different things. So they don't give them that right to do it so they don't mess it up. Where in my case, they've allowed me to do that. Now they're cutting back some on it as time has gone by. But I can install things that some others can't. I'm supposed to pay attention and do things correctly. Access, make sure that your controls are actually applied. And when you set up controls, that you then do use those controls. Software and hardware installation and changes, don't follow the policy. That make sure people are doing, and that was an issue with what I just mentioned to you. That if you allow people to install software on the machines, then the issue is, are they going to install things that they shouldn't be installing? And about what is your policy on what they're allowed to install, what they're not allowed to install. And lack of a disaster recovery plan. And there's been very few organizations I've ever been to that I've ever not had any idea what their disaster recovery plan was. In all honesty, I have no idea what a disaster recovery plan is for here at the college. If you hire me to do a web page for you and I manage a web page for you, I will tell my people, clients, what my disaster recovery plan is for them on that. Most of them, it goes in one ear and out the other ear. But I have got a copy of their web page in almost all cases. And I've got to say almost all cases because there's a couple of cases I can't do this. that I keep a copy of the whole thing sitting on my machine. WordPress presents a problem on that. With WordPress, you can't get a copy of it down onto your machine, so that if you need to regenerate it, it's easily regenerated. So if my server space where I put their pages, something happens there, and a few years ago, it was hacked one time, and somebody got in and they changed one page. Well, as soon as I was told about that the page was messed up, the ones that hacked it, I know were greatly disappointed because what they had done to it only appeared for a couple of hours. And as soon as I got back home to my machine, that the page was back correct. Because I had a full copy of that page sitting on my machine, and all I did was of that site, and I proceeded to just upload the pages for the whole site, and it was back to normal. And got killed what they had gone in there and done. And when I was running the computers for Swainsboro Tech, that I would tell people continuously that the plan there, if something happened to the building or whatever else, that I had a full backup of the entire system sitting at my house. And that all I had to do was go to another school in the state, because we were all using the same equipment, and that I could go to another school in the state and have us at least working during the night. And that I talked to several of the schools, and that where we could, and there was actually a couple of them had two machines that they were running and going, okay, if something did happen to you, you could come in and we could shut down one machine and just work off the other machine and let you then install your stuff on that other machine and run. Or the other one was that I could go in and run things at night, and that we'd have to work around on odd hours, but we could keep on getting stuff out, that I could generate stuff out for them during the nighttime when the other people were closed down, that they could let me be in the building during the night and work through the night of whatever the school had sent me and said, here's things that we got to do, run it, and then during the day, I could go home and sleep, or actually go to the motel and sleep, okay? So variety of things on that. Physical security, they talk about four threats on that. I'm not sure if I said four correctly. How is our equipment actually the threats to it? Hardware threats. Physical damage to the servers, the routers, the switches, the cabling plant, the workstations. Your networking part of it, you really want those routers and servers, preferably behind locked doors. But depending on the size of the organization, they may be physically locked off separately, or it's just that they are in a different office and that they're locked somewhere on that and be more open than you would think, like here at the school. As far as I know, all of our routers and switches are behind locked doors from where other people are normally. So they're not sitting in someone's office. There's other places on a smaller level that you quite often will see them sitting in somebody's office. Because if it's a small organization of just a few people, you set them up in one of their offices. Or you may find a room down the hall or whatever you can put them in that is separate. But in a small one, but it's still, if it's sitting in the office of a small organization, it's secure there because that person keeps the office door shut, locked, and it's only access to them, okay? Environmental threats, temperature is one of them. You gotta make sure the rooms that the equipment's all working in stays within the temperature range it should be, that it doesn't get too hot or too cold. That can be a definite issue. When I was at Swainsboro Tech, and they put in a large server there to run everything when I started there in 1981. And the room had supposedly been built for that server to be put in there just 2 years before. They had a spot along the wall that it was supposed to go, had conduit running to there, except whoever did it, the architect or the builder, may have changed on it when they did it, had too small a conduit for the size of cable that we needed, electrical cable that needed run there. So you couldn't run the electrical cable through the conduit from the fuse box or circuit breaker box that was down the hall where they had set up for them. Second thing was they didn't have enough air conditioning in the room. So when we went to when the machine arrived and they said about how much it needed of air conditioning on it, that the heating and air instructor went, that room's not going to be able to handle that. He's going to be burned out there, which was true. I could go in, turn that machine on without where we did get extra air conditioning in the room. I could turn that machine on in the dead of winter, and no heat having been on in the building other than keeping the building at 50 degrees on the weekend. I could turn it on, and within an hour, it was over 80 degrees in the room. It was generating that much heat on it. That was in the dead of winter. Now you can imagine when we're getting this summer, what was going on with it, okay? So they had to drop a 3-ton air conditioner onto the roof of the building right above it, just to cool that machine. And that's what he said it was going to take to keep that machine cooled. And the hottest weather was that we needed a 3-ton air conditioner, which will cool your house for you, okay? So it's that size of an air conditioning unit we set on top of the thing. And had the vent blowing straight down on it, taking back in right there. Electrical wiring, we had to run wire that was exposed into there over to the machine and on it instead of where it was all going to be nicely hidden and look real nice. So if you walked behind the machine, you had to be careful that you didn't trip over the electrical cables. So lack of planning. So electrical threats on there follows along with that, but the other part is you need UPSs on these things of some type. Now whether it's actually a UPS full one or just if it's just filtering the power or whether it actually gives power to keep it running, depends on it. That you need things that control like the brownout, etc. If you go into business places, every machine that's sitting around there should have its own little separate UPS. So if you look at my machine in my office over at Walker, that they bought me a UPS for that machine, so that it's sitting there on a UPS. The server should be on some type of at least protection on that. So we had an isolation transformer on that server that I was using back there where I was just describing. All it did was just filter out the electricity, but if the power went off, everything was dead. It didn't generate any power. When I worked at PMSC in South Carolina, which had this huge data center that ran a number of insurance companies, they had 3 major generators sitting in that building that ran off of diesel fuel that would keep the building and all of those equipment, that ton of equipment they had sitting there running for 2 weeks on this big tank of diesel fuel that they had sitting there. And when one hurricane went through, which I think was Hugo, if I remember right, that was Hugo. That when it went through and it damaged South Carolina a whole lot, they were without power for almost 2 weeks, and it kept it going the whole time though. And then they were going, we got to get some diesel fuel here to keep these generators going. And they all looked like tractor engines when I went back in there and installed the generators. They like full-size engines that you see on tractors out there, okay, that was generating the power. So they had that. Maintenance threats, that they mentioned those things, that they said that it's things like electrostatic discharge. So you got to allow for that one. Normally you would not carpet, which I told them also when we built this building. You would not carpet a room that's full of computers, because there's chances of electricity off of carpet. Although you can get electrostatic carpeting. You can get carpeting that has little metal wires run through it that then you attach those wires to a little strip running down the side of the room, and that grounds the whole room and you don't get electricity on. When I worked at Sea Island Company at the Cloister Hotel down on the coast, they had carpet in the server room. And during the winter, we had a problem of static electricity. Their solution was we kept a bottle of spray bottle that was filled with water, and a couple of times a day we'd go around and just spray some on the carpet to keep the humidity up in the carpet and thereby kill the static electricity. Not a way that's normally recommended to you, but it works, okay? Best thing would have been in that server room to have not had carpet in it. Should have been tile. Maintenance threats. That they mentioned on that about make sure you've got critical spare parts. Everything's labeled. And I have been in places that I was expecting nothing to be labeled and seen stuff labeled nicely, where when you got back to the switch box, it did label exactly which machine everything came from. And other cases I've gone in places and when you had a machine go bad, you weren't sure, and that it looked like actually it was bad back at the switch because they weren't getting stuff from there. And so you had to unplug it and put it in another port and see if that took care of it. If you just had a port die, because ports do die on switches. That we had to sit there and guess our way through, unplug and plug, and see when we unplugged it, did that disable the one that we were trying to? And we had to do that in off hours, because otherwise we would have, as we did that each time, we would have knocked people that were working offline. So you do want to make sure on that one. So make sure you do secure your computer room, and then figure out ways to protect on it. I'm not sure, and I know they didn't. I know they did not do what I told them to do, but you look up and see. Although they may have taken out the other part. Since this is a room full of computer equipment, we actually should not have water fire extinguishers across the top of the room. Because if there's a fire or those things go off for whatever reason, if they get frozen one night in the winter or whatever and break, it's like we're going to destroy all this equipment here, and they spray that water. Technically, you should have something else like halon or something like that. Okay. The way they had it originally designed, and I don't know, but I'm for tiles in here to see. They actually had the water lines going down there to the restrooms and the water fountains running across these 3 classrooms that were for the computer area. And I'm going, that don't work. And why they didn't have them designed just to go down the hall, I have no idea. Because that would be the best place to run them down anyway. But they have run them across these 3 rooms. I've had them remove it twice from the blueprints. And they had reappeared at least once, and I don't know, when it came down to finality, if they removed them from going across here or not. I told them, you can't do that. You don't want to run a water line across your computer rooms. Because you know it's going to break at some point. It's going to leak at some point along the way. So why ask for a problem? They then talk about types of network attacks. So they talk about viruses, worms, and Trojan horses as types of malware. You'll see people use viruses or malware. Malware really is a general term for it all, but you'll also see people use virus as a general term on it nowadays too. Although virus technically has a distinct definition, that it's a piece of malware that procreates itself by copying itself onto other machines. Okay. But with the virus, somebody's got to help it along to get from place to place. A worm will self-replicate itself, okay? So that if you get a worm into the network, it'll then replicate itself to other machines without a program, somebody running a program or something that causes it to spread. For a virus, somebody's got to do something to spread it. Just like if y'all catch a virus, for one of the rest of us to catch it, you got to sneeze or something, or we got to touch hands that got the germs on it to get to each other. But think about worms. You can go out there and cut a worm in half, and what happens? You got two worms now, because they will actually, it doesn't have to have a head on it, it'll generate itself another head for the part that you cut off. And so that's why it's the worm there. So I follow on that one. But you'll quite often see worms just included in there as a virus, okay? Virus has gotten to be really a general term nowadays. Trojan horses actually will fall the same way too. Trojan horses are programs that are put onto your machine, malware that's put on your machine, that then at some designated time or when some designated event occurs, it then runs. And that's going off of the legend, the myth of the Trojan horse from Greek mythology, okay? And remember where they had in there about, I don't know, was the Trojans that did it? I guess it was the Trojans that did it on attacking another Greek city. They built a huge, big horse and to the other city, and they pushed it right on into the city of this nice little monument that Troy had sent to them, which were Trojans. And it was filled up with all these fighting men, and after a day or two or whatever, at a certain point, they opened up and they were already inside the city and attacked the city and took the city. Okay? The same thing's working on a Trojan horse malware. It gets put on your machine. It may be set up where it activates itself on a certain date or time. It may be where it activates itself on a certain event. A lot of them are date and time, and that they then run at a certain point. Or it could be when something happens. So those can be set up all kinds of ways. But Trojan horses are not going to reproduce themselves, so that's as opposed to a virus or a worm. So you do see a lot of Trojan horses around. And actually, where we talk about denial of service attacks and stuff, you'll quite often see a Trojan horse be set up as the bot that sets off the attack from. But they'll stick Trojan horses out there on a lot of machines. Reconnaissance attacks, I talk about those. The reconnaissance attack is actually where your threat agent goes in and just investigates your network. They're not doing anything at that point. They're just looking for vulnerabilities and all of that, and how the whole network works, and just go in and are figuring that all out. An access attack is where they then go in and they do their damages. Okay, they accessed it and they damage it at that point. For the reconnaissance one, they're really not doing anything other than preparing to do the access attack on it. They're finding all the things so that they know then when they come back later. So you're wanting to watch and see when that happens to make sure you're blocking out whatever they're finding as their way to get in to do that, so that they can come back on it. Then denial of service attacks, I've talked about those before in here, and that's where, for instance, that they'll send massive number of pings or other ICMP messages at networks or servers to lock them down where the server locks down, because that's a top priority item it has to respond to, and that it stops them from doing that. As I mentioned, that there's ping sweep tools also that do the massive number of sending. But if you use an extended ping command, which the Cisco equipment definitely has, I think you can do it, and you can do it to a certain degree in Windows. You can definitely do it in Unix, that you can tell it to send out an unlimited number of pings at whatever spot. whereas in Windows by default, or even in Cisco by default, it only sends 4 or 5. One of those sends 4 pings, one of them sends 5 by default, but you can change that around. And then you can do port scans to go in and find what's all the open ports. And so then that tells you, okay, if that port's open, there's a port you can probably get through. And we talked about last week, 3389 being an example of one that if you find that one open, that tells you you can get into that person's machine probably, if they're running Windows, but you can probably use remote desktop connection to get into their machine. Okay, so you want that one closed. Access attacks, they talk about some different ones of those. There could be brute force attacks where they go in and just try guessing their passwords to do a password attack. Trojan horse attacks where it goes in and does its own work differently on it. Packet sniffers where we're watching the traffic and see what all passwords travel across on it and determine passwords from there. Where they didn't do them in SSH, they did it in Telnet or in some other program, okay? And it wasn't encrypted. Trust exploitation, where you use unauthorized privileges to get in that you shouldn't have had. That they shouldn't have had. The threat actor could be actually supposed to be able to get in because they should be able to get into plenty of systems, okay? But you don't want them getting in at any height to it. It's just like if I want to go into Amazon, I need to be able to get into Amazon to order stuff, right? But I shouldn't be able to get into Amazon's regular site above that where I can go in and change prices or whatever, unless it's an item I'm selling. Does everybody follow on that? And if they set their security wrong, I could go in and do all kinds of things. So then if Andrew was selling something out there and I didn't like Andrew now, that I might go in and mark what he normally sells for $100 out there on there, that it's now available for 1 cent. So then he goes broke real quick on the whole thing. Or I may go in to destroy his sales totally, and what he sells for $100, I'll mark it that it sells for $100,000. So he doesn't get any sales then. And either way of those could completely damage Andrew, right? Because either you got no sales or you just got this ton of sales that was below what your cost was. So you're losing a fortune on it. And then how you explain to all those customers on it. Just like when you go to a store and then people have switched prices on things. It messes things up. Port redirection, they mentioned on that, where you can change things that where it's using a certain port, that you can change it to where it's working differently on it and where its trust comes from there. Man in the middle has actually been mentioned a few times through the book on it, and that's where somebody gets on into your network and sits between where communications is coming across and that they intercept and work with the data coming across, and that it's literally sitting in the way of everything, okay? And it passes through them, and so then they can intercept and change data as they need to. Denial of service attack, I've already mentioned those. And distributed denial of service attack is where it's not just coming from one place, and that's where you could use Trojan horse to do it. Set it up all these other machines. In fact, set them where they're all going to go off at 12:01 p.m. on April the 31st, and at that point, they all get hitting everybody. It won't work on April 31st because it's only 30 days in April. But don't do the bad things I'm telling you about, okay? So everybody follow that one? But you can't be a security person without knowing the bad things to know what you're trying to prevent. The fact that you know how to open a door that's not locked doesn't mean you should be going and opening doors that are not locked. We shouldn't be going around the parking lot opening everybody's door on the car. That's not locked out there, okay? They talk about mitigation on it. Make sure that you've got your the defense in depth they mentioned to you, which is a layered model, which is saying you don't just have one type of defense blocking people, but they got to go through different things. What I mentioned on the banner issue, my GNTC issue, notice that was layered and effectively pretty well. There's not a problem there, okay? That everybody's using the default password on registering because they actually already went through a layer of defense on it where they had to use their single logon to get into the system in the first place. And then, so there's that one. Keep backups. I've already mentioned that to you earlier in here. Make sure you do them regularly. Make sure you keep them secure. Sometimes, depending on the organization, you may need to keep them at the bank in a safety secure into a box thing. Keeping them in a separate location is usually the big thing. You do not want to keep them at the same place. So if we go to backup Nathaniel's machine right there, we don't want to keep the copy of his backup of his machine, A, sitting in his room, or B, even sitting in his building. Okay, we want to keep it somewhere else. So I've kept backups when I was running it there at Swainsboro Tech. The backups I had for everything they had there was sitting at my house. If somebody's broken in and got the stuff, it wouldn't have done them any good without having the right machine to do it all with and knowing how I had security on it. But if something happened to the school building, we had the backups. If you keep them in the same place, you got deep trouble. When I worked for the Cloister as a computer operator assistant programmer, one of our responsibilities was, because we were on an island down there on the ocean, was if there was a hurricane coming in and they gave an evacuation order when we were working, we were specifically told if we were working at that point and we had to evacuate the island, we had to take the backups with us. And they were to stay with us until we could get back to the island. And thereby they had an off-sort backup. They also kept their backups every night. We took them to another facility on the island and kept there. But we had to leave, which down there was a realistic thing. Every few years you do have to evacuate for a hurricane coming through. And that it could well be that when you were working, that the evacuation order came in and that you were told you had to, everybody was to leave, in which case we were told we were to leave and take the backups with us. And then if the place did get wiped out while we were gone, we'd get back with them, find somebody with the company and get back and find out what we were going to do about it and then get them new equipment and everything. But they'd have all of their data still. If not, as soon as we were allowed to come back, then we would bring it back and get the machine back up and running along with whatever crew was supposed to be there at that point that was scheduled. Upgrade, update, and patches are extremely important. Upgrade is having the current version of the software on there. Sometimes you don't use the latest one, although from a security viewpoint, if there's been upgrade, part of the upgrade was for security issues, you may well want to be running the latest one, okay? So Windows or your operating system, you normally want the latest version so that you've got security on it. However, other software packages, you may not have the latest because it just doesn't do what you need it to do. Okay, so you may not always upgrade the application software, but you need to be aware of that. Updates is where you get regular small changes to it, and that's the things you get on Patch Tuesday, along with patches, but where they've made improvements to it and they send you small improvements, but they didn't come out with a whole new version of the software. Does that make sense to everybody? And then patches are where it's corrections to errors that they found in software. And those could be security patches or they could be just code patches, correct things that they discovered were wrong in there. And so either one of those. Authentication, authorization, and accounting, you'll see that one mentioned quite often, and you'll see it as AAA, the 3 A's. Authentication says that we determine that you are who you say you are. And that's what your password, or where you got to put in a code that they send text you on there, is that's used for authentication. It's determining that you really are who you say you are. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, that doesn't mean that if Andrew gives me his username and password to log in, which he shouldn't, but he might, for some reason, into some program, which I do have to do occasionally. I've got somebody helping me fix a web page today to do some things for me, and the website does not allow more than just the one user, so I'm going to have to let them use my login to get in, to play with it, and they got to be able to see what's going on. I will change the password after their exit out of it, okay? But what I would prefer to do, and which WordPress actually lets you do, that you can put another user in there and give them certain access to it, and I would prefer to have created another account for them so that then they authenticate as who they really are, not as me. Okay. Authorization is, what are you allowed to access? So if you got to authenticate it, so they figured out you are who you say you are. And I say passwords is the biggest common one on that, and now where the PIN number they send you, second thing on that, where it could be doing it through different ones off of medical, off of your iris scan or anything else. Authorization is, what are you allowed to use? And very few people are allowed to use everything in a system, in a decent sized organization, okay? A small organization, yeah, there's a number of people, maybe all access to everything within it, okay? But here at school, I can get into some of your records out there, your academic records, that I can't get into your financial records. So I have no idea how much financial aid you get or any of that type of stuff. When students ask me about how much are they getting, et cetera, and I'm going, can't tell you because I don't have any access to that. I can't get into payroll, but I can get into my record of where I have to record my hours every day. But Mr. Furlock can't get into my hours, but he can get into his, and I can't get into his. So they follow him up. That's authorization. Okay. Accounting is where we keep a log of who's gotten into stuff. So that when I go into whatever, that if we're doing that part 2, which we should be, but it's not always done, it should show that I had been in to whatever it is that I got into. So we look later and figure out who it was, if something did get goofed up or whatever, that we can see who it was that occurred this. Now, if Susie gets a hold of my password somehow and gets in and goes and does damages, it's going to show that it looked like it was me doing it, although I swear up and down that I didn't do it, and that we then got to figure out how did whoever it was, Susie in that case, get my password. And obviously the first thing to do in that case is you change the password. Now Susie can't get in. That's me. Okay. Firewalls, extreme. So do know AAA, and if you're going to do anything security-wise, you have to know and be aware of AAA. Just like when y'all were last semester, you should have learned about CIA also, confidentiality, integrity. I can't remember the A right off for some reason. Okay. Firewalls, you need those out there. There's a variety of firewalls. The firewall will allow or block traffic coming in or going out. You can set it up both ways. Okay. They talk about types of firewalls, that there are packet filtering ones, that they are working on IP addresses that are allowed for certain type traffic or not allowed, and blocking on that, or the MAC addresses, okay? And so even though MAC addresses are on frames, it actually gets into packet filtering, is where that actually gets considered on the firewall. Application filtering of the firewall can stop specific users or from specific places of people being able to get to applications or allow them to access certain applications. And that goes partly back to your port numbers. Okay. URL filtering is where you allow your users to only get to certain websites, or that you specifically do not allow them to go to certain websites. Does that make sense? So, and then stateful inspection, packet inspection, is where it checks all of the packets coming in and makes sure that they are legitimate. Endpoint security is where we've got security set up on our endpoints, like your PCs, your phones, etc. And that's where you're going to use your antivirus software. You may have firewalls sitting on them, etc. Okay. Device security, we've really talked about that to a degree through here. They talk about Cisco Auto Secure, but that's just their product to help secure their Cisco routers. Although with the level of routers and switches we're using in here, it's not available on the high level endpoints. It's on the medium level ones that they have. So they don't even show you how to use them. Passwords, we've talked about those all the way through already. And that is, don't make them real simple where you have dictionary attack or whatever. You have the requirements on length and also complexity. And then they talk about make sure you do encrypt passwords. The length, make sure you got the requirements on that. And where you're trying to defer somebody being able to get it by brute force. If you do brute force, it's saying, okay, I try to sign in as Susie, I got her username. And that's easy enough for you to get usernames. Because even like here at school, all we got to know is what your email address is, we got your username. And then I go to try to log in as Susie. If I'm doing brute force, I'll sit there and start just guessing passwords. What's the first one I'm going to try on Susie? What did I tell you at the very beginning of this lecture is the most commonly used password? Password. Password. So if I got any intelligence, the first thing I'm going to try on Susie is type password. Okay? The other one is you can set up requirements on there that they can only enter the password so many times and you lock them out for a certain amount of time. Now, I've seen that be taken advantage of also. Because I know companies that had where you got locked out for 20 minutes. And I knew people when they got to work, they immediately went to log on, and specifically, because it locked them out after 3 bad passwords for 20 minutes, they specifically got on, put in the wrong password 3 times, so they're locked out, and so now they go and get their cup of coffee leisurely and come back because they can't do anything on the computer at this point. So sometimes that can work around. And so I sort of mentioned all of that right there. Another one is enable SSH is the way to use to get into your machines of your different routers and switches, and disable telnet. Because SSH, remember, sends it always encrypted. Telnet sends it as plain text. And man in the middle can read plain text, no problem. It doesn't mean when it goes across on SSH that it's 100% secure. It is 99 point something secure, okay? But they may be able to get the right code to decrypt it, okay? Disable unused services. I've mentioned that to you already in here. We have mentioned about remote desktop connection. If you're not using it, disable it. And in fact, if you are using it, my suggestion to you and most people's suggestion to you is you can actually go into it on the machine and change the port that it uses. Y'all follow on that? And so now somebody got to figure out that you are using remote desktop connection and then figure out what port that you are using it on. Okay. So disable the ones that you are not using. And on the routers and switches, you can use the show IP ports all, and it will tell you what all the ports are that you've got enabled on that machine. And so disable it. And that gets me to the blue pages in the book, so we're through the chapter. And it's 5 minutes till 10, so I did pretty good on that. Okay, so Wednesday, we'll just go over 17, probably not real long on it, but we'll just review on a few things through there for you. Although 17 is assigned for next week, okay? So when, I think the test is on 16 and 17, if I remember right. I think you had a test last week on 14 and 15, or was it 13 and 14, or maybe it was 13 to 15, I don't remember. In y'all's case, I actually had the dates right on there, so if you haven't done the test, it was actually active. He said it was due today. My other class, for some reason, I set it up where it became active today, shut down next Monday, so I had to extend their deadline for the test in there. But your class, you had it available all week, so you got to get it done. If you haven't taken it, make sure you take it today. Okay, that it's there till then, and then 17 will cover Wednesday, but the test that 17 is on, which I think is like 16 and 17, or maybe 15 through 17, something on there, won't be available till Monday, okay? And it's due the next Monday. Everybody follow on that? So make sure you do all of that. But we'll go ahead and get the chapter covered, and that way then we can use next week completely for y'all to get all of your labs finished up and turned in. Okay? So on that note, we'll stop. And then y'all can put on leave or whatever. And I will stop that recording. And hopefully get it posted.